On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected. Glenda Jackson, a towering figure in both the arts and politics, passed away peacefully at the age of 87 on June 15, 2023. Her death, due to natural causes, marked the end of an extraordinary life that spanned two of Britain's most demanding arenas, stage and state. Jackson's passing was not just the loss of a brilliant actress or a principled politician, but the departure of a woman who relentlessly challenged the expectations of gender, power, and public service in the 20th and 21st centuries. As an actress, Jackson came to prominence in the 1960s and 70s with performances that broke molds. Fierce, unapologetic portrayals of complex women in films like Women in Love and A Touch of Class, both of which earned her Academy Awards. Her on-screen presence reflected an era grappling with shifting cultural mores and the rise of feminist consciousness. Later, her decision to step away from acting at the height of her fame to serve as a member of Parliament for over 2 decades epitomized a deeper commitment that art and politics were not separate, but deeply intertwined. Jackson's death prompted tributes from both the entertainment industry and political world, a rare convergence that underscored her dual legacy. In an era where celebrities often hover on the edges of political discourse, Jackson had fully crossed that line, and with integrity. Her departure invited reflection on the courage it takes to defy public expectation, to move from performance to policy, and to speak truth to power with both eloquence and tenacity. Though her death did not shift global politics or cinema overnight, it amplified her legend as a woman who lived fiercely and spoke fiercely. In the public imagination, she remains emblematic of a generation unwilling to be boxed in by roles, on stage, screen, or society. In remembering Glenda Jackson, we are reminded of how mortality strips away titles but leaves legacy. Through revivals of her films, parliamentary archives, and the stories passed from one inspired woman to another, she endures. Her life, marked by conviction and intellect, teaches us that memory does not reside solely in statues or ceremonies, but in the courage to live authentically. Through her, we reflect on how art and action together shape history, and how bold voices refuse to fade. Ella Fitzgerald, the First Lady of Song, died on June 15, 1996, at the age of 79, from complications related to diabetes. Her passing marked the end of an era in American music, one defined by resilience, artistic excellence, and the quiet strength of a woman who overcame systemic barriers to become one of the most beloved voices of the 20th century. Fitzgerald's death was the result of natural causes, though her final years were marked by intense health challenges. In 1993, both of her legs were amputated below the knee due to complications from diabetes, and she spent her final days in her Beverly Hills home surrounded by family and music. Her death was peaceful, yet profoundly symbolic. In a time when African American women often struggled for visibility and dignity, Fitzgerald's graceful departure mirrored the humility with which she had always carried her immense fame. Her passing evoked a wave of tributes from around the world. President Bill Clinton called her an American treasure, and the global jazz community mourned the loss of not only a virtuoso performer, but a symbol of artistic integrity. Her voice had transcended race, class, and genre. In a society historically riddled with segregation and prejudice, Fitzgerald stood as a shining example of how art could unify. Ella Fitzgerald's death amplified her legend in many ways. For younger generations discovering her posthumously, she became more than a performer. She was a symbol of excellence under pressure, grace amidst injustice. Her voice, with its 3-octave range and impeccable diction, continued to echo in the halls of American culture, influencing singers from every genre. What her death and enduring legacy reveals about humanity is this: we turn to music to make sense of the human experience. In Ella, we found not only extraordinary technical skill, but the warmth and vulnerability that allowed generations to feel seen, soothed, and uplifted. Today, Fitzgerald is immortalized through countless awards, recordings, and tributes. Jazz festivals bear her name, and her voice still plays in film, television, and streaming playlists. Her image graces murals, stamps, and statues. But her true memorial lies in the way she changed the cultural soundscape. Ella Fitzgerald showed us that greatness doesn't always shout, it often sings. And in her song, she became timeless. Maureen Arthur, a vibrant actress known for her comedic timing and vivacious screen presence, passed away on June 15, 2022, at the age of 88 due to natural causes. Best remembered for her performance as Hetty LaRue in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, both on Broadway and in the 1967 film adaptation, Arthur's passing marked the quiet end of a career that thrived during a time of shifting gender roles and cultural expectations in entertainment. Her death was not the subject of global headlines, but it resonated with fans of classic Broadway and 1960s cinema, a reminder of a glamorous, transitional era in American popular culture. Arthur embodied a type of character that was both a product of and a commentary on her time. The alluring secretary, caught between the remnants of post-war traditionalism and the burgeoning feminist movement. Her comedic roles often played with the stereotypes of femininity, challenging them through exaggerated performance and charisma. Arthur's passing highlighted a broader conversation about the legacy of actresses whose careers were shaped by the studio system and Broadway's golden age. In an industry often focused on youth and reinvention, performers like her carved out lasting impressions by leaning into their individuality. Her death, while not altering the trajectory of history, served as a cultural bookmark, inviting reflection on how entertainment once mirrored and occasionally challenged society's views on gender and ambition. The immediate consequences of her passing were largely centered in nostalgic circles. Tributes from co-stars, theater enthusiasts, and classic film fans who recalled her comic brilliance and distinctive voice. Yet in this remembrance lies the deeper impact, how figures like Arthur remained vivid, not because they dominated headlines, but because they brought joy, humor, and sharp commentary to their roles. Maureen Arthur's legacy lives on in the preserved recordings of her work and in the memory of a time when musicals and screwball comedies served as both escapism and subtle critique. Her career, though not mythologized on the scale of screen legends, reminds us that immortality in culture does not require grandiosity. It often lives in laughter, charm, and the enduring flicker of performance. Her passing reminds us that the theater and screen are archives of memory, and that in every laugh and line delivered with flair, performers like Arthur continue to live, framed in light, preserved in story. Jacques Berserak, a French actor and businessman, passed away on June 15, 2014, at the age of 87, due to natural causes. Best known for his film roles during the 1950s and early 1960s, and for his high-profile marriage to Ginger Rogers, Bergerak's death marked the quiet end of a life that intersected with Hollywood glamour, post-war European elegance, and the evolving role of celebrity beyond the screen. Bergerak's path to fame was unconventional. Originally a law student in France, he was discovered by Rogers while she was on vacation. Their marriage brought him to the spotlight, and soon he was cast in American films such as Gigi, 1958, and Les Girls, 1957. While he never achieved the same level of stardom as some of his contemporaries, Berserak represented a cosmopolitan allure at a time when the world was rebuilding from war and eager to embrace sophistication and cultural exchange. His passing was gentle and relatively unheralded, a reflection of the kind of fame he embodied, graceful, modest, and firmly rooted in a bygone era. The lack of widespread media attention also underscored a shift in cultural memory, a reminder that celebrity, like all fame, is fleeting unless tethered to broader historical or artistic movements. Still, for classic cinema enthusiasts and those who followed mid-century Hollywood, Berserak's death offered a moment to revisit the post-war era's fascination with foreign charm and romantic idealism. Though not a transformative figure in cinema history, Berserak's life and career highlighted the mid-20th century's values: beauty, internationalism, and the golden promise of reinvention. He later left acting to enter business, eventually leading Revlon's operations in Europe and heading up a perfume company. His career shift prefigured the later trend of actors becoming entrepreneurs, blurring the lines between fame and commerce. Jacques Berserak's legacy lies not in groundbreaking performances or scandalous headlines, but in the graceful way he moved between worlds, law and art, Europe and America, spotlight and boardroom. His story reminds us that mortality does not erase impact, it reframes it. We immortalize figures like Berserak not necessarily through grand monuments, but through the quiet elegance of preserved films, remembered charm, and the recognition that every era has its own icons, some loud, others softly enduring. Sherri Martel, born Sherri was a trailblazing figure in the world of professional wrestling, remembered for her fierce persona, dynamic charisma, and ability to bridge the gap between traditional femininity and athletic dominance. She died on June 15, 2007, at the age of 49, from a drug overdose, an all-too-common fate among wrestling professionals of her era. Her death was sudden and tragic, occurring at her mother's home in Alabama, and cast a somber light on the physical and emotional toll the wrestling industry can take. Martell rose to fame in the 1980s and early 1990s, an era when women in wrestling were still often relegated to supporting roles. Yet she shattered expectations, not just as a wrestler but as a manager, elevating male stars like Macho Man Randy Savage, Shawn Michaels, and Ted DiBiase. Her persona, Sensational Sherri, was loud, defiant, and unapologetically powerful. She wasn't there to be eye candy. She was there to dominate. Her death reflected deeper issues of her time: the grueling demands of the wrestling circuit, minimal support for performers' long-term health, and the culture of silence around addiction and mental health in the industry. Sherri, like many of her peers, paid the price for a system that often celebrated excess while offering little in terms of care once the spotlight faded. The immediate reaction to her passing was one of widespread mourning within the wrestling community. Fans and fellow performers paid tribute to her legacy, highlighting not only her in-ring achievements, but also her pioneering spirit. WWE honored her posthumously with induction into the Hall of Fame in 2006, a year before her death, which served as a living recognition of her contributions to the sport. Sherri Martel's legend did not so much shift history as clarify it, forcing the wrestling world and its audience to confront the cost of fame and the resilience of women in a male-dominated arena. In her flamboyant entrances, fierce matches, and commanding presence, she became a symbol of transformation in sports entertainment. Her death invites a reflection on how we remember those who pushed boundaries but were ultimately broken by the very structures they helped build. Through archival footage, fan tributes, and institutional recognition, Sherri Martel remains immortal, not just as a sensational performer, but as a symbol of strength, struggle, and the enduring impact of visibility in a world still learning how to value its trailblazers. Nadia Gray, a Romanian-born actress best remembered for her poised and elegant roles in European cinema, died of natural causes on June 13, 1994, in New York City. She was 70. While her passing was quiet, far from the dramatic exits of historical monarchs or political martyrs, it nevertheless signified the fading of a certain European cinematic sophistication rooted in post-war art and aristocratic allure. Gray's most iconic role came in Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita, 1960, where she played a wealthy heiress hosting a decadent party in a crumbling Roman mansion, a scene that would come to symbolize the existential fatigue of post-war Europe's upper classes. Her performance was marked by elegance, detachment, and a subtle commentary on the aimlessness of elite society. In many ways, Gray herself embodied that era's contradictions. Born into privilege in Romania, she fled fascism and communism, eventually remaking herself in Western European film circles. Her death, while not violent or unexpected, reflects the gradual disappearance of an entire generation of European artists whose careers were shaped by exile, war, reinvention, and the blending of aristocratic and artistic identities. The post-war film industry offered a refuge and a platform for many such figures, and Gray's career was a product of both privilege and displacement, a common duality of her era. The immediate response to her death was modest in the public eye, but film enthusiasts and scholars of European cinema acknowledged it as the end of a chapter in refined, auteur-driven film history. She was a figure from a world that no longer quite exists, one in which style, poise, and global turmoil merged on screen in layered performances. Gray's death invites reflection on the quieter forms of legacy. Unlike figures whose deaths caused global upheaval, her influence remains in the atmosphere of classic cinema and in the characters that still grace screens decades later. She is remembered not through mass mourning, but through celluloid, a lasting tribute in shadow and light. In the broader conversation on mortality and memory, Gray's passing reminds us that legacy isn't always forged through noise or upheaval. Sometimes it lingers in elegance, in the fading glow of a chandelier-lit ballroom, or in a smile cast across a black and white screen. Through her roles, Nadia Gray is gently immortalized, an echo of a world where cinema itself was a form of resistance, identity, and rebirth. Victor French, best known for his warm and rugged roles on television classics like Little House on the Prairie and Highway to Heaven, died of lung cancer on June 15, 1989, at the age of 54. His death, the result of a natural but preventable illness tied to smoking, a habit common and culturally normalized for much of his life, reflected broader mid-20th century attitudes toward health, masculinity, and mortality. French's passing struck a particularly poignant chord among fans and colleagues. Having built a career portraying kind-hearted, salt-of-the-earth characters, he was seen as an everyman with a deeply empathetic screen presence. His close collaboration with Michael Landon, especially on Highway to Heaven, where the two tackled themes of redemption, grief, and human decency, made French more than a supporting actor. He became a symbol of quiet strength and moral grounding on television during a time of increasing cynicism in popular media. The immediate consequence of his death was a deep sense of loss among those who saw him not just as a performer, but as a voice of compassion. Highway to Heaven was still in syndication, and many viewers had grown emotionally attached to his portrayal of Mark Gordon, the skeptical but loyal partner to Landon's angelic Jonathan Smith. His departure from the world marked the end of an era when network television dared to address faith, hope, and mortality head-on, without irony or spectacle. French's death did not cause a global cultural shift, but it amplified his legend within the hearts of viewers who saw in him a reflection of decency often missing from the larger-than-life figures of Hollywood. In an age where celebrity was becoming increasingly performative, French represented authenticity, a man who played characters rooted in emotional reality. His legacy lives on in reruns, in the soft moral lessons of his television work, and in the quiet reverence of fans who remember his voice, his expressions, and his deep, grounding presence. French's death reminds us that not all historical echoes come from moments of grandeur or violence. Some come in the form of subtle kindnesses, carried through stories and performances that continue to comfort audiences long after the actor himself has gone. In remembering Victor French, we're reminded that mortality is universal, but how we live and how we are remembered depends on the impact we leave behind in the hearts of others. James Knox Polk, the 11th President of the United States, died on June 15, 1849, just 103 days after leaving office. His death was due to cholera, a disease that swept through parts of the country during the mid-19th century in deadly outbreaks. Ironically, Polk had just completed one of the most ambitious and expansionist presidencies in American history, a term defined by territorial conquest, war, and ceaseless administrative vigor. His sudden death marked a sharp contrast, a powerful man brought down not by political enemies or war, but by a microscopic enemy emblematic of the era's limited public health knowledge. Polk's demise was reflective of the 19th century tension between progress and fragility. Under his leadership, the United States had stretched its borders dramatically, through the annexation of Texas, the Oregon Treaty with Britain, and the conclusion of the Mexican-American War, which added present-day California, Arizona, and New Mexico to the Union. His presidency embodied manifest destiny, the belief that American expansion across the continent was both justified and inevitable. Yet Polk's unrelenting commitment to duty came at a personal cost. He worked long hours, rarely took breaks, and aged visibly during his single term. By his own choice, he declined to run for re-election. It is said he returned to private life physically depleted. Within 3 months of leaving office, he was dead. His passing reinforced a harsh truth of the time. Even the most powerful men were vulnerable to the era's frequent and indiscriminate diseases. The consequences of Polk's death were more symbolic than political. Though he had accomplished much, he had few years to shape his legacy or engage in elder statesmanship. His early death perhaps prevented more critical scrutiny of his policies, particularly the Mexican-American War, which many later viewed as an unjust conflict. At the time, however, he was celebrated as a man who fulfilled every promise he made on the campaign trail. Polk is memorialized in statues, in the name of counties and schools, and at his modest presidential tomb in Tennessee. Yet his legacy remains complicated, marked by territorial gain and the seeds of division that would later erupt in civil war. Polk's death reminds us that power does not immunize one from mortality, and that the pursuit of greatness often comes with personal sacrifice. We remember such figures not only for what they built, but for how their stories illuminate the costs of ambition and the fragility of human life amid historical forces.